Chapter 43 of Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger. A Story of Frontier Reform. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marilyn Campbell. Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger. A Story of Frontier Reform by Bigelow Paine. In conclusion, Captain Bill McDonald of Texas, what he has been and what he is today. So now we have arrived at the end of our story, the story of a man who does things, who has been making history for 25 years, who is still making it today. It is the story of a life so full of incident and episode that we have been able to give only a chapter here and there, to touch the high places, as it were, for the tale entire would fill a library, and would involve the chronology of a state, which in that quarter of a century has increased its population nearly 5 times, its wealth in a like proportion, while its progress in education and morals has been incalculable. It is with the improvement last named that Bill McDonald and the little army of state rangers from which he had been selected as an example have been chiefly concerned, though advancement in other directions has been collateral and dependent on moral growth. Order is not only the first law of heaven, but of the frontier, and by the sturdy frontier battalion has the fight for order been made and won. For in spite of plague spots here and there, and in a state of so vast an area and so recent and motley a settlement, it would be strange indeed if these did not exist. Texas is today a splendid empire of beautiful towns and cities, of fair and fruitful farms, and of handsome, hearty, law-abiding men and women. The Panhandle has become a garden, not a Garden of Eden exactly, but a garden of agriculture and home culture, a larger garden than Eden, and happier and more profitable than Eden has ever been since the fall. And the best evidence of what the Ranger force has done for Texas may be found in the steady reduction of its numbers. By the very nature of its achievements, it has each year reduced the necessity for its existence. Today, it consists of 4 little companies, aggregating about 30 men all told. They are brave, picked men, who face death daily and are not afraid. If from among these Bill McDonald has been marked for special distinction, it is not because he has been more willing to do and dare, or more resolute in its purpose of reform, but because he was at his birth marked by that special genius which, whatever his environment, would make episodic achievement and peculiar distinction his inevitable portion. Long before he became an officer, he was a peacemaker. Wherever trouble occurred, McDonald had a genius for being there, separating and disarming the combatants, admonishing them in that convincing manner which few men ever resented. No one ever knew him to flinch at a time like that. Perhaps no one ever dreamed that he would be likely to do so. He was variously gifted. His perceptions were abnormally keen, his deductive conclusions often startling in their exactness. In his detective work, he was sometimes referred to as the Sherlock Holmes of Texas, though his processes would seem to have been more instinctive and perhaps less intellectual than those of Dr. Doyle's imaginary hero. For he had the eyes of a fox, the ears of a wolf, and he could follow a scent like a hound. "Cap, you have eyes in the back of your head and can smell a criminal in the dark," was once said to him, and perhaps this statement was not so wide of the mark. His understanding of character, frontier character, was likewise a gift. Almost every man has a right side, and Bill McDonald always seemed to know how to reach that side. When no right side developed, he knew how to handle the wrong one. He seldom failed to win the confidence and the respect, even friendship, of his prisoners. Such enemies as he has today are not among the men he caused to be punished, but among those who feared, and still fear, capture and punishment. There may be a good many such. Time and again his removal was not only requested, but demanded, sometimes by a whole community, a community which did not want the law's enforcement, and such a demand was likely to be accompanied by the threat of political revolt. But Texas, from the days of Sam Houston, has had good governors, governors to whom such a demand was in the nature of a compliment, and the best reason for retaining the offending incumbent. Hence Bill McDonald not only remained in service, but was given an ever-widening usefulness. His suddenness and determination was a constant amazement to lawbreakers. Once when he was in El Paso, he received a telegram stating that some of his horses had been stolen from a ranch he then owned on the Oklahoma and Texas line. That ranch was nearly 500 miles away as a crow flies. But Bill McDonald was on the train bound in that direction while the telegram was still damp. Arriving at his ranch, he struck the trail and set out alone to follow it, without rest, through Greer County, riding hot foot a distance of 300 miles, overtaking the thieves at last somewhere beyond Norman, Oklahoma. Sid Woodring, a wary old outlaw, was in that gang, also his nephew Frank Woodring, and a third member whose name is not recalled. It was a genuine surprise when Bill McDonald, whom they thought at the other end of Texas, charged in among them and had them disarmed almost before they realized what was going on. He marched them back to the jail at Norman, had them indicted in Greer County, where the court was then in session, got them convicted for terms ranging from 5 to 10 years, and returned with his recovered horses, completing in the space of a few days one of the neatest and most spectacular bits of official work on record. The amount of his work was something enormous. In the 2 years ending August 31st, 1904, Ranger Company B, which he commanded, traveled 74,537 miles, made 205 scouts, and 174 arrests. 31 of the arrests were for murder, and nearly all for desperate crimes. When it is remembered that some of those scouts required days, and some of the arrests were hundreds of miles apart, and the result of long and arduous trailing and persistent detective work, the labor and the result can be better understood. Nor is this an unusual report. It has been selected at random and is by no means of the busiest period. The period of the early 90s, those riotous panhandle days. There was no show, no fuss and feathers about his work. Riot threatened or broke out here and there. The newspapers carried a line that Captain Bill was on the way to the scene. He arrived, often alone, disarmed a mob, made an arrest or two, perhaps, gave out a few quick admonitions, and it was all over, next day to be forgotten. With many other men, such cases would have meant resistance, bloodshed, troops, and the long animosities of years. That was his genius, to settle matters, to dispose of them, to get through and to be at other work without waste of time. Once when he was ordered to Galveston to prevent a prize fight, he arrived at the hall where it was to take place after the crowd had gathered. He did not bother to discuss matters with the managers or principals, but walked out on the stage and announced briefly to the audience that the fight would not take place, for the reason that it was against the law which he was there to enforce. That was a fair sample of his method, to know the law and to enforce it, without a fireworks and without violence. No man has ever been his equal, perhaps, in that field. It was true he was lucky, for bullets missed him, as a rule, and he steered clear of many dead falls. Among the Mexicans, and bad men generally, there grew up a superstition that he was bulletproof, and after the Rio Grande affair there would seem to be some reason for such a belief, for he stood up there in plain view, a tall and shining mark, blazing away, and no bullet touched him. He has always been modest concerning his achievements, discussing them in the few words of an official report. When he has spoken at all, it has been his habit to present the general result, rather than his part in it. It was this characteristic that made difficult the securing of material for these chapters. In preparing for the Rio Grande battle, for instance, I said to him, "Of course you hit some of those Mexicans?" "Well, you see, standing up as I was, I had a good place to shoot from." "Then you did hit some of them?" "Well, of course, as I say, I had the best place to shoot from, and I felt as if I could pick the buttons off their coats." "But, Captain, what I want to know is if you think you really hit any of them." "Oh, well, hell," very reluctantly, "I don't guess I missed any of them." "Did you feel afraid?" "No, I don't reckon I thought of that." Yet every man is afraid of something. It was about the time of the conversation just noted, he was then visiting New York City, that he said anxiously to a companion who was steering him through the mess of traffic at one of the 23rd Street crossings, "Look here, you'll get me killed yet in a place like this. I don't know the game." The muzzle of a Colt 45 or of a Winchester had no terrors for him, but a phalanx of automobiles and traction cars, mingled with a medley of other vehicles, bearing down from 4 different directions, a perfect triangle of impending death, proved disturbing to one accustomed to simpler, if even more malignant, dangers. With conditions of his own kind, however, he was at home, even in the metropolis. Visiting Coney Island one night, he came upon 2 tough individuals, clutched in a fierce grip and trying to damage each other vitally. Texas was a long way off, but it did not matter. He took hold of those men, saying, "Look here, what are you men acting so sorry for? Stop this now and go home." They were the sort of men who would have resisted a policeman, who might have killed him. What they did now was to cease their warfare and stare in a dazed way at the tall, lean figure, the unusual features, and the large white hat of Captain Bill. "You fellows go on home now," he admonished in his slow, homely way, and the 2 set out in different directions without a word. It was on his way back to Texas that he paid his promised visit to President Roosevelt. He was a bit nervous over the prospect, but found himself altogether at ease a moment after his arrival at the White House. For he was given the sort of hearty welcome that goes with the wider life he knew best, and was introduced without formality to men who were delighted to honor him for what he was and had been. If Theodore Roosevelt had enjoyed his visit to the plains, so no less did Captain Bill McDonald find delight among the halls and highways of legislation. Captain Bill McDonald of Texas, the last of a vanishing race and a vanished day, of the race to which Crockett and Bowie and Travis and Fannin belonged, of a day when a hip and a holster were made one for the other, when to reach in that direction meant, for somebody, post-mortem and obsequies. State Revenue Agent of Texas. Such today is his title, and the work he has undertaken in his new field goes bravely on. Texas still needs his honesty, his courage, and his determination. When those qualities direct the affairs of the body politic, the prosperity and predominance of that commonwealth are assured. End of chapter 43.